Good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday, so that means it's time for Waiver Wire Tuesdays here on College Football Mornings. As always, I'm Colin, and it's just me today. Austin is currently at his beach home in Ibiza, but before leaving, he did put together an article over at campusdecanton.com detailing his thoughts on who to pick up off waivers this week. So go check out that article. But in the meantime, click the like button on this video to show Austin that we don't need him. Let's get this video over 30 likes while he's away. Drop a comment down there saying how much you enjoyed the show without him and show him we don't need him. But we'll start here by quickly checking in on the players that we discussed last week in this video. Before we start, unfortunately, Fantrax isn't showing the roster percentage of players right now for some reason. So hopefully these players are available on your waivers that we're going to talk about here tonight. First up on the check-in here, Dawood Davis, wide receiver for Western Kentucky, once again led the team in receiving. So I hope you were able to add him last week. For whatever reason he's still out there, go rush and smash the add button on him immediately. Tyron Smith, wide receiver for UTEP, had another solid week with 8 catches for 71 yards, but still really just remains a watch list player for now for me in leagues with limited waiver pickups. Nathan Carter, running back for UConn, had another big week, getting 23 carries and putting up 123 yards and a touchdown and adding 1 catch for 18 yards. It seems like he's going to be the focal point of this offense moving forward. UConn has a tough next 4 games coming up against a Syracuse defense that just held Malik Cunningham and Louisville's rushing attack in check. Then they get Michigan, NC State, and Fresno State. I really wouldn't expect much from Carter over the next 4 weeks, but he is somebody who could help you down the stretch. So I would pick him up at this point in leagues if I have unlimited waiver pickups, especially if it's a deeper league or if you're thin at running back. But I wouldn't spend more than 5 to 10% of my budget on Carter, though, especially given his current upcoming schedule. Next up, Calvin Tyler, Jr., running back for Utah State, unsurprisingly got nothing going against that tough Alabama defense. Still just a watch list player at this point, but it should get better for him moving forward. Mike Wright, quarterback for Vanderbilt, had another massive game, 245 yards passing and 4 touchdowns, adding 84 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Vanderbilt has one more game before they get into SEC play. They will get Northern Illinois next week. If you need a QB next week, you're in an unlimited waiver pickup league, I think he's a solid add before Alabama and Georgia because he's going to get those 2 teams in 2 of the next 3 weeks. But I wouldn't spend more than 5% of my budget on Mike Wright at this point. Anthony Grant, running back for Nebraska, had another big week. This time, Ramir Johnson did dress for the game, but Ramir Johnson only saw 2 offensive snaps total. Anthony Grant had 23 carries for 189 yards and 2 touchdowns and added 1 catch for 0 yards. At this point, I think we can assume Grant is operating as the lead back in this offense and is a player that I'm picking up in leagues with unlimited waivers. If I'm in a pinch at running back, I would probably even still pick him up in leagues with limited waivers. I probably wouldn't spend more than 10 to 15% of my budget on Grant, though. But moving on to this week, we saw several breakout performances. At the top of the list is Chuck Sizzle, Mr. Charlie Jones Jr., the wide receiver from Purdue who transferred in from Iowa. If you watched the Purdue-Penn State game for 2 minutes, you probably heard the announcers mention that Sizzle played travel baseball with Aiden O'Connell when they were in high school. That connection showed itself all night. Sizzle had 18 targets, turned that into 12 catches for 153 yards and a touchdown. Charlie Jones is my top waiver add of the week this week. Similarly to Dawood Davis last week, I would spend 30 to 40% of my budget on Sizzle and maybe even up to 50% if I'm a strong contender who's one piece away from feeling really good about my chances this year. Next up, we have Todd Centeio, quarterback for James Madison, who transferred in from Colorado State. Centeio had a case for player of the week this week, throwing for 287 yards and 6 touchdowns, rushing for another 110 yards. It was a soft matchup against Middle Tennessee State, but this passing attack looked really good. Centeio is a player I would be adding in all leagues if he's available. 6 touchdowns on 33 attempts, likely not going to be repeatable, but the added rushing value is enough to make Centeio a starting option in the right matchups. So I wouldn't go crazy, but I think you could spend about 20 or so percent on Centeo if he is available. Next up, we have Campus to Canton's freshman of the week this week, CJ Donaldson, running back from West Virginia. Donaldson is a big back, 6'2, 240 pounds, but he moves well, and especially at that size. Now, he did only play 15 snaps at running back in this one, but he did see 7 carries and turn those into 125 yards and a touchdown against a very good Pitt D line. I'd expect increased usage as the season goes on, especially if we see the type of efficiency that we did in this one. But what makes Donaldson a must-add in all waiver formats for me is that he's a cheat code. He has tight end eligibility on Fantrax at this point, and he should be much more reliable than most tight ends that you'll find on waivers. I'd spend up to 20% of my budget on him, especially if I'm thin at tight end. The last player I'd recommend adding in all formats is Oregon State tight end Luke Musgrave. Musgrave saw 52 offensive snaps, 13 of which came in the slot, 4 of them out wide. He ran around on 21 of his 26 passing down snaps. He was the most targeted player on this team, turned in 6 receptions for 89 yards and a touchdown. Now, Oregon State actually struggled to get the running game going for most of this game. I'd expect them to still be more of a run-heavy team, but Musgrave's usage as a receiver at the tight end position, especially at a position that really thins out quick for fantasy purposes, makes him a player that I would spend 10 to 15% of my budget on. Now, there are several players that I would add in unlimited waiver pickup leagues, but I would likely just watch list these guys if I have limited number of pickups throughout the year. First up is Rodney Hammond, running back for Pitt. Now, we all thought it was going to be Izzy Abanaconda that would be the back to own in this offense, but he really struggled in week one. Izzy only managed to turn his 8 carries into 15 yards. Hammond and Izzy split snaps almost exactly evenly, but Hammond was much more effective, turning his 16 carries into 74 yards and 2 touchdowns, and adding another 2 catches for 55 yards. Now, Hammond did suffer an injury in this one, and it is certainly a situation to monitor. I'm also not ready to write off Abanaconda just yet either, but this performance from Hammond was strong enough that I would spend 10% or so on him on waivers. Now, head coach Pat Narduzzi was evasive with his updates as per usual, but I would keep an eye out to see if this shoulder injury ends up being worse than expected. Next up, we have Ladd McConkey, wide receiver from Georgia. Now, despite being one of the least heralded players on this offense, Stetson Bennett and offensive coordinator Todd Monken seem to love McConkey for some reason. He turned in 5 catches into 72 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was the second most heavily targeted player on this team behind Kenny McIntosh, the running back, and was even used on some rush plays with McConkey getting 2 carries for 16 yards and adding a 3rd touchdown in the game. I don't see another 3-touchdown performance in his future, at least not anytime soon. But McConkey's not a player to ignore anymore. I'd probably spend about 5 to 7% of my budget on McConkey at this point. Lastly, for players that add in the unlimited waiver pickup leagues is the wide receiver duo for Indiana, Cam Camper and DJ Matthews. Camper caught 11 of his 17 targets for 156 yards, and Matthews caught 7 targets for 7 of his 12 targets for 109 yards and a touchdown. Now, Indiana's not a good team, and they really struggle to run the ball in this one. So there should be a team that needs to throw a little bit more often than they would like to throughout the course of this year. And with a strong target concentration on these 2 wide receivers that we just saw in this past game, I think they're both worth an add at this point. Camper saw more targets. He was a little bit more heavily involved. So he would be my top add out of the 2, but I don't really have a strong preference either way here. I would add either one of them for about 5 to 7% of my budget. Now, the watch list players for this week, it could be a long list, but I'll try to pare it down, keep it brief for you here. Quarterback Kyle Van Treese for Georgia Southern threw for 367 yards and 4 touchdowns this week against FCS opponent Morgan State. They threw the ball 46 times compared to 32 rushes, despite winning this game by 52 points. Former USC head coach Clay Helton is now at the helm for Georgia Southern, meaning this team should throw a lot. Now, I do want to see it against better competition, but Van Treese is definitely one to watch given the passing volume that we're kind of expecting at this point. Next up, QB Daniel Richardson for Central Michigan. CMU got behind big early in this game against Oklahoma State, giving up over 50 points in the first half. That caused Richardson to have to throw the ball 49 times compared to Central Michigan's 36 rush attempts. Now, Richardson was very efficient, completed 73% of his passes for 424 yards and 4 touchdowns. And the Chippewas are still going to be centered on running back Lou Nichols on offense. There's not really a doubt about that. But it's hard to ignore this type of performance from Richardson, and it's one that I'm keeping an eye on moving forward. This week, with Josh Downs, wide receiver for North Carolina, out against App State, it was Kobe Paysauer who stepped into the role in the slot. He saw 41 snaps out of the slot. He had 8 catches on 8 targets for 91 yards and a touchdown. Josh Downs is considered week to week at this point with a lower body injury. The vagueness of this injury, the vagueness of the time frame does have me mildly concerned here. So I'm monitoring the news this week, and I might even speculatively add Paysauer as a free agent after the waivers clear, if it's an unlimited waiver pickup league, especially if it sounds like Downs may miss another game as the week goes on. Last up here, we have Roman Hemby, running back for Maryland. Hemby led the team with 7 carries against Buffalo, but was by far the most effective back. He turned those 7 carries into 114 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, that type of efficiency, obviously not going to be repeatable each week, but he may have earned himself more work, and he is worth watching throughout the year here. All right, that's going to do it for us here on Waiver Wire Tuesday. Be sure to like this video while Austin's away. Show him that we like the show better without him. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the content that we're dropping every single day here at Campus to Canton. But as always, I'm Colin, and have a good one.